It's only fair you pay more than your brothers. My dad said, raising my. I'm Kelly, 27, a graphic designer from Chicago, with an eye for detail and a heart that's always put family first. Growing up, I believed that love meant equal treatment. But last year taught me otherwise when my dad suddenly increased my share of household expenses by 50%, while my brothers paid the same. That decision forced me to choose between accepting unfairness or finding my own path. I never imagined my departure would expose the fragile foundation our family was built on. If you're watching this, let me know where you're tuning in from. And hit subscribe to find out how standing my ground changed everything when their lights went out. Life in our suburban Chicago home had always been comfortable, if not perfect. My family consisted of my dad, Frank, a practical accountant who prided himself on managing our finances, my mom, Susan, a kindergarten teacher with a gentle disposition, and my two younger brothers, James and Michael, 24 and 22 respectively. We had all moved back home after college. It was supposed to be temporary, a way to save money in an economy that wasn't particularly kind to new graduates. For me, it had been 3 years since I'd returned with my graphic design degree. I had secured a position at Horizon Marketing, a mid-sized agency downtown, where I was slowly building my career and portfolio. James, my middle brother, had graduated with a business degree and worked in sales at a tech company. He spent most of his free time playing video games or out with friends. Michael, the youngest, had a degree in communications and had recently started at a media company. He was more thoughtful than James, but still enjoyed the comforts of home without much responsibility. Our arrangement seemed practical on paper. We each paid an equal share of the household expenses, about $800 monthly, covering the mortgage, utilities, and groceries. Dad had calculated it precisely, explaining that it was far cheaper than what we'd pay for our own places, and he was right about that. What the financial arrangement didn't account for was the imbalance in household responsibilities. While my brothers treated our home like a hotel, I found myself taking on most of the cooking and cleaning. Monday nights I made pasta dishes. Wednesdays were for home-style roasts, and weekends I often prepared elaborate brunches that everyone enjoyed. Between meals, I kept the common areas tidy and helped Mom with deeper cleaning on weekends. "Kelly, this chicken is amazing," Mom would say during dinner, while Dad nodded appreciatively. James would mumble agreement through a full mouth, barely looking up from his plate. Michael at least helped clear the table sometimes, but household maintenance wasn't high on either of my brothers' priority lists. Despite the imbalance, I rarely complained. Family was important to me, and I genuinely enjoyed our dinners together, listening to Dad talk about his clients or Mom share stories about her kindergartners. There was comfort in our routine, even if I sometimes felt the distribution of responsibilities wasn't quite fair. There were subtle signs of preferential treatment that I had learned to ignore. Dad would regularly ask James and Michael about their weekend plans, offering them his credit card for gas. "You boys be careful out there," he'd say with a wink. When I mentioned my own weekend plans, his response was typically, "That sounds nice, Kelly," without the same offer of financial support. Mom noticed these discrepancies but rarely intervened. "Your father just relates more easily to the boys," she'd tell me privately. "You know he loves you just as much." I believed her, or at least I wanted to. Besides, I was doing well at work. My supervisors consistently praised my designs, and clients had begun specifically requesting me for their projects. I was building a solid reputation, and my portfolio was growing impressively diverse. My career trajectory looked promising, even if my living situation wasn't ideal. Little did I know that my professional success would soon become the catalyst for exposing the deeper inequalities that had been simmering beneath our family's surface for years. The promotion that I had worked so hard for would become the very thing that would force me to confront not just my father's biases, but my own willingness to accept them for the sake of family harmony. As autumn leaves began to fall outside our family home, the winds of change were already stirring inside, about to challenge everything I thought I understood about fairness, family, and my place within it all. The day everything began to shift started normally enough. I had been at Horizon Marketing for nearly 3 years, consistently putting in extra hours and taking on additional projects to prove my worth. My hard work had finally paid off when my supervisor Lisa called me into her office on a crisp Tuesday morning. Kelly, your work on the Jefferson account was exceptional, Lisa said, her typically serious expression softening into a smile. The client specifically mentioned how your designs captured exactly what they were looking for. I felt a flutter of pride. Thanks, Lisa. I really enjoyed that project. Well, the team and I have been discussing your contributions, and we've decided it's time for a change. She paused dramatically before breaking into a full smile. We're promoting you to senior graphic designer with a 15% raise starting next month. The raise wasn't enormous in absolute terms, about $7,000 annually, but it represented recognition of my hard work and opened doors for future advancement. I spent the rest of the day floating on air, eager to share my good news with my family. That evening, I stopped at the grocery store on my way home and splurged on ingredients for a special celebration dinner. I prepared my dad's favorite pot roast with all the trimmings, set the dining room table with our nicer dishes, and even picked up a bottle of wine. When everyone gathered for dinner, I could barely contain my excitement. We settled into our usual spots, my parents at the ends of the rectangular table, James and Michael on one side, me on the other. I have some news, I announced after Dad had said grace. Their faces turned toward me expectantly. I got promoted to senior graphic designer today with a 15% raise. Mom's face lit up immediately. Oh, Kelly, that's wonderful news. Congratulations, sweetheart. Michael gave me a genuine smile. Way to go, sis. James nodded. Cool. Does this mean you're buying the next round of groceries? He laughed, already turning his attention back to his plate. I looked to Dad, waiting for his reaction. He finished chewing, slowly took a sip of water, and then finally spoke. That's good news, Kelly. You've always been a hard worker. There was a brief pause that should have contained more praise, but instead he added, You know, with this raise, it's probably time we reconsider your contribution to the household. The table went silent. I blinked, certain I had misheard him. What do you mean, Dad? Well, you're making more money now. He spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. It's only fair that you contribute more than your brothers, since you'll have more disposable income. I felt my celebration dinner turning sour in my stomach. But we've always split expenses equally, I said carefully, trying to keep any accusation out of my voice. James and Michael make similar salaries to what I'll be making now. Dad waved his hand dismissively. It's different for them. They're still getting established. Besides, they have student loans. So do I reminded him, my voice tightening. And I've been at my company the same amount of time James has been at his. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Mom looked down at her plate, avoiding eye contact. Michael shifted awkwardly in his chair while James continued eating as if nothing unusual was happening. We can discuss this later, Dad finally said with finality, effectively closing the conversation. I spent the rest of the meal in a daze, my appetite gone. What had started as one of the proudest moments of my career had transformed into something that felt uncomfortably like punishment for success. Later that week, I met my best friend Samantha for coffee. We'd been friends since college, and she knew my family dynamics well. That's completely unfair, she said after I recounted the dinner conversation. Why should you pay more just because you got a raise? Do your brothers even do any chores around the house? I stirred my latte slowly. Occasionally, but mostly no. Samantha's eyes narrowed. So you do more work, and your dad wants you to pay more money. Kelly, that's not right. Maybe I'm overreacting, I suggested, though I didn't really believe it. Maybe he was just thinking out loud. Talk to them, Samantha urged. Make it clear that you expect equal treatment, and if they don't listen... She left the sentence hanging. If they don't listen, what? I prompted. She looked me directly in the eyes. Then maybe it's time to consider other living arrangements. The thought had crossed my mind, but hearing Samantha say it out loud made it suddenly seem more real, more possible. I had always assumed I would stay home until I had saved enough for a down payment on a small condo, but now I wondered if that plan needed revision. That night, I lay awake remembering other instances of unequal treatment throughout our childhood. How James got a car for his 16th birthday, while I received driving lessons and occasional use of Mom's car. How Michael's decision to change majors 3 times was supported without question, while Dad had questioned my choice of graphic design as not practical enough. Small inequities I had dismissed at the time now formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. I decided to approach my parents for a serious conversation. This wasn't about the money itself, but about respect and fairness principles I wasn't willing to compromise on any longer. The following Sunday afternoon presented the perfect opportunity for our conversation. James was out with friends, and Michael was at a work event. I found my parents in the living room, Dad reading the newspaper in his recliner, while Mom folded laundry on the couch. "Mom, Dad, can we talk?" I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. Dad lowered his paper slightly. "What about Kelly?" "About what you said at dinner the other night about me paying more for household expenses." Mom immediately set down the shirt she was folding, her expression concerned. Dad fully lowered his newspaper and gestured toward the empty spot on the couch beside Mom. I sat down, taking a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said. I don't think it's fair for me to pay more than James and Michael just because I got a raise." Dad's expression hardened slightly. "Kelly being part of a family means everyone contributes according to their ability. You'll be making more money now." "I understand that concept, Dad, but it doesn't seem to apply to my brothers. James got a bonus last quarter, but you didn't ask him to increase his contribution." "That's different," Dad said dismissively. "That was a one-time bonus." "My raise isn't that substantial," I countered. "After taxes, it's about $400 a month. And I still have student loans to pay off just like they do." "Your brothers have different expenses," Mom interjected softly. "James is saving for a newer car, and Michael has been talking about graduate school." I looked at her incredulously. "And I'm saving to eventually move out and buy my own place. We all have goals, Mom." Dad cleared his throat. "Kelly, I've given this a lot of thought. Your brothers each pay $800 a month. Starting next month, your share will be $1,200. The statement landed like a physical blow. "That's a 50% increase, Dad. How is that remotely fair?" "Life isn't always fair, Kelly," he replied, a phrase he'd used throughout our childhood whenever we complained about something. "This is what's best for the family right now." "What about my non-financial contributions?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I do most of the cooking and cleaning around here. James and Michael barely load their own dishes in the dishwasher." Dad waved his hand dismissively. "That's different. We appreciate your help around the house, of course, but that's not the same as financial contribution." "How is it different?" I challenged. "If I stopped cooking and cleaning, you'd have to pay someone or do it yourselves. That has real value." "Kelly," Mom began in her placating voice, "you know we appreciate everything you do." "Appreciation doesn't pay my student loans," I replied more sharply than I intended. "And it doesn't explain why I'm being singled out to pay more." Dad's patience was clearly wearing thin. "This isn't a democracy, Kelly. This is what's happening. Starting next month, your share is $1,200. I stood up, surprising even myself with what came next. "Then I have a choice to make. Either all 3 of us pay equally, or I'll find my own place and pay my own way entirely." Dad actually chuckled as if I'd told a mildly amusing joke. "Don't be dramatic, Kelly. Where would you go? Rents in this area are ridiculous. You'd be paying twice as much to live on your own." "That would be my decision to make," I said firmly. Mom looked genuinely worried now. "Kelly, honey, let's not make rash decisions. We can discuss this more." "There's nothing to discuss," Dad interrupted. "I've made my decision. Kelly, you'll thank me later when you have more savings than your brothers, because you learned financial responsibility earlier." I looked from my father's resolute face to my mother's concerned one, and realized this was a battle I wasn't going to win through discussion. My father truly believed he was being fair, and nothing I could say would change his mind. "I need some time to think," I said finally, and left the room before either of them could respond. Later that evening, both James and Michael returned home. I overheard Dad telling them about our conversation in the kitchen. "Kelly's getting a raise, so her household contribution is going up next month," he explained casually. "Just so you boys know." "Cool." James replied his usual response to nearly everything. Michael was more thoughtful. "Did she agree to that? She seemed upset earlier." "She'll come around," Dad said confidently. Where else is she going to go? That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized I had a decision to make that would change everything. I could accept my father's terms and swallow the unfairness, or I could stand up for myself and accept the consequences. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The first apartment I viewed was discouraging a basement unit, with barely any natural light and suspicious stains on the carpet. The second wasn't much better overpriced for its size and location. But the third, a small studio in a converted warehouse about 20 minutes from my office, felt promising from the moment I walked in. The space was compact, but thoughtfully designed with tall windows that let in abundant light, exposed brick walls, and refinished hardwood floors. The kitchen was small but functional, and the bathroom had been recently updated. At $1,400 a month plus utilities, it would stretch my budget thin, but my recent promotion made it just manageable. The building used to be a textile factory in the 40s, the property manager explained as she showed me around. It was converted to residential use about 10 years ago. I imagined myself living there, having my own space designed exactly as I wanted. No more compromising on decor with family members. No more feeling like my contributions weren't valued. I'll take it, I said decisively, surprising even myself with my certainty. I signed the lease that afternoon and paid the security deposit with money I'd been saving for an eventual down payment on a condo. It wasn't how I had planned to use those savings, but it felt necessary now. For the next 2 weeks, I kept my plans to myself. I quietly packed my belongings when no one was home, storing boxes in my closet and under my bed. I arranged for a small moving truck and enlisted Samantha's help for moving day, which I scheduled for the last Saturday of the month, just before my father's new payment arrangement was set to begin. My mother noticed something was different. "You've been quiet lately, Kelly," she commented one evening as we prepared dinner together. "Is everything okay?" I chop vegetables with more force than necessary. "Just busy with work, Mom." She hesitated. "About what your father said. I'm sure he'd reconsider if you talked to him again." "Would he?" I glanced at her skeptically. "Has Dad ever changed his mind once it's made up?" She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. The night before moving day, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Excitement about my new independence, wrestled with sadness about leaving the family home, and anxiety about finances. I carefully calculated my new budget, accounting for rent, utilities, groceries, student loans, and commuting costs. It would be tight, but doable, especially with my upcoming raise. Saturday morning arrived with a clarity that matched my resolve. I had arranged for the moving truck to arrive at 10, when Dad would be at his weekly golf game. James would be sleeping in, and Michael had mentioned plans with colleagues. Only Mom would be home, which was intentional. I couldn't face everyone at once. Samantha arrived at 9:30, her small SUV ready to transport my more fragile items. "You sure about this?" she asked as she helped me carry the first boxes downstairs. "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied, and meant it. Mom emerged from the kitchen as we made our second trip down. Her face fell when she saw the boxes. "Kelly, what's happening?" "I'm moving out, Mom. I found an apartment." Her eyes widened. "But you were serious. I thought you were just upset." "I was serious," I confirmed, setting down a box. "Dad made his choice and now I'm making mine." "Does he know?" she asked, wringing her hands. "He will soon enough." The moving truck arrived right on schedule. The driver, a burly man named Tony, and his assistant made quick work of loading my furniture and boxes. I didn't have much, just my bedroom set, desk, bookshelf, and personal belongings. Mom watched the process with a stricken expression, occasionally making last-ditch efforts to change my mind. "At least stay for dinner tonight. Let's talk this through as a family," she pleaded. "I need to get settled in my new place, Mom," I said gently. "I'll call you tomorrow." Michael returned home unexpectedly as the last few boxes were being loaded. "You're actually leaving?" he asked, looking stunned. "I am," I confirmed, "because of what Dad said about the money." "It's not just about the money, Michael. It's about being treated equally and fairly." He frowned. "I never thought about it before." but you do a lot around here that we take for granted." His acknowledgement was unexpectedly touching. "Thanks for noticing, even if it's a bit late." Just as we were finishing up, James arrived home from wherever he'd spent the night. He took in the scene with raised eyebrows. "Whoa, dramatic much." I didn't bother responding to him. Instead, I took one last look around my childhood bedroom, now stripped bare, and felt a surprising sense of closure. As I got into my car to follow the moving truck, Mom hugged me tightly. "Please reconsider Kelly." "Tell Dad I'll text him my new address for mail forwarding," I said gently, disengaging from her embrace. "And tell him not to worry about the extra $400 a month. I'm sure he'll figure out how to cover it." That evening, after Samantha had helped me set up the essentials in my new apartment and left with a promise to check in tomorrow, I sat on my bed and composed a simple text message to my family group chat. "I'll pass on the new payment arrangement. I've moved out, I'm safe and will call soon." I silenced my phone afterward, not ready to deal with the barrage of responses I knew would come. Instead, I ordered a pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and sat cross-legged on my new living room floor surrounded by unpacked boxes, and the exhilarating, terrifying awareness that this space was entirely mine. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly independent, answerable to no one but myself. The thought was both liberating and daunting as I raised my plastic cup in a silent toast to my new beginning. The first week in my new apartment passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. I established new routines, finding the right time to shower, to ensure hot water learning which floorboards creaked, and determining the perfect spot on my small balcony to enjoy morning coffee. These tiny victories of independent living gave me a surprising sense of accomplishment. My family's reactions varied wildly. Mom called daily, her voice wavering between concern and tentative support. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself," she admitted during our third call. "But I miss having you home." Dad maintained a stubborn silence for 5 days before finally calling. His voice was stiff with pride. "I hope you're happy with your decision, Kelly. The door is always open when you realize how expensive living alone really is." I kept my response measured. "I'm managing just fine, Dad. Thank you for your concern." James sent a single text. "Dad's pretty pissed. House is a mess without you. Later." Michael surprisingly visited on the weekend, bringing a houseplant as a housewarming gift and awkwardly looking around my small studio. "It's nice," he offered, seeming genuinely impressed. "Cozy." "Thanks," I replied, appreciating his effort. "How are things at home?" He ran a hand through his hair. "Different. Mom's been asking us to help more with chores. James complained, but I don't mind, honestly. Never realized how much you did until you weren't there doing it." This small acknowledgement meant more than I expected it to. Work became my sanctuary, the one place unaffected by the family drama. I threw myself into projects with renewed focus, earning compliments from clients and colleagues alike. My promotion officially took effect, and seeing the increased amount on my first paycheck provided validation that I was capable of supporting myself. At home, I established new patterns. I cooked simpler meals than I had for the family, but took pleasure in preparing exactly what I wanted. I joined a yoga studio 2 blocks from my apartment and attended morning classes 3 times a week. I arranged my furniture and decorated my walls according to my own aesthetic preferences, with no one to critique my choices. 3 weeks after my departure, Mom called with the first signs of trouble at home. The utility bills came in higher than expected. She mentioned casually, as if this information wasn't significant. "Oh," I kept my tone neutral. "Yes, your father is a bit surprised. He didn't realize how much the bills would increase without your contribution." I bit back the urge to say, "I told you so," and instead asked, "How are you handling the cooking and cleaning?" She sighed. "It's been an adjustment. James and Michael are supposed to alternate dinner duties, but James ordered pizza 3 times last week. Your father wasn't pleased with the expense." I felt a twinge of satisfaction, mixed with concern for my mother, who was undoubtedly bearing the brunt of the additional household work. By the end of the first month, the cracks in my family's routine were becoming more apparent. Mom mentioned offhandedly that they were behind on the electric bill, having forgotten to account for the auto payment that usually came from my account. "Your father had to dip into savings," She confided, her voice low as if she was sharing a state secret. He's not happy about it. Michael's texts became more frequent, often mundane updates that revealed the changing home dynamics. Dad made a chore chart. James is ignoring it. Or, Mom's been teaching me how to make your chicken casserole. Mine came out burnt. At 6 weeks, I received an unexpected invitation to Sunday dinner. We miss you, Mom said. Please come. Your father wants to talk. I agreed with some trepidation, setting clear boundaries before accepting. I'll come for dinner, but I'm not moving back, and I'm not going to be guilted about my decision. Of course not, honey. We just want to see you. Sunday arrived, and I found myself standing on the front porch of my family home, feeling like a visitor rather than a resident for the first time. Mom opened the door and enveloped me in a tight hug that communicated volumes about how much she'd missed me. The house looked different, somehow slightly less tidy than when I lived there. A pile of mail sat unopened on the entryway table, and I noticed dust on the picture frames lining the hallway. Dad greeted me with awkward formality, a handshake instead of a hug. Kelly, you look well. Thanks, Dad. So do you. This wasn't entirely truthful. He looked tired with new lines around his eyes. James lounged on the couch offering a casual wave. Michael, to my surprise, gave me a genuine hug. The place isn't the same without you, sis. Dinner was Mom's pot roast, my favorite, an obvious attempt to create a warm, welcoming atmosphere. The conversation remained carefully neutral through the main course, touching on my new apartment, my work projects, and Michael's recent presentation at his company. It wasn't until dessert that Dad cleared his throat and addressed the real reason for the invitation. Kelly, we've had some time to reconsider the household financial arrangement. I set down my fork, suddenly alert. Oh, your mother and I have been discussing it. And perhaps I was hasty in my decision to increase your share. This was as close to an admission of error as my father ever came. I waited, not making it easier for him. The household expenses have been more challenging to manage than anticipated. He continued, carefully avoiding any direct acknowledgement of being wrong. We thought perhaps you might reconsider your living situation under the original equal payment arrangement. The invitation wasn't an apology, just a business proposition. I felt a flicker of disappointment, but kept my expression neutral. Thank you for the offer, Dad, but I'm happy in my new place. I've signed a year lease. His face fell slightly. Well, leases can be broken with a fee, of course. We could discuss helping with that. It's not about the lease, I said firmly. I'm enjoying my independence. This is a good step for me right now. The rest of the evening had an undertone of tension. As I prepared to leave, Dad made one final attempt, mentioning the financial wisdom of shared expenses versus living alone. I thanked him for his concern, but remained firm in my decision. As Michael walked me to my car, he murmured, "Things are kind of falling apart without you, Kelly. Not just the chores, but like the whole vibe of the house." I felt a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. Everyone will adjust, Michael. Sometimes change is necessary. What I didn't realize then was how quickly that change would accelerate, or that within weeks my family would be facing a crisis that would force everyone to reevaluate their assumptions about contribution, fairness, and family responsibility. The real breaking point came almost exactly 3 months after I'd moved out. It was a Wednesday evening in late autumn, and I was preparing a simple dinner in my apartment when my phone lit up with a call from my mother. Her voice came through the speaker with an edge of panic I'd rarely heard before. Kelly, are you busy right now? We have a situation. I set down my knife, immediately concerned. What's going on, Mom? The electricity just got shut off, she said, her voice small and embarrassed. Your father thought he had paid the bill, but apparently there was some mix-up with the automatic payments after you left, and we've fallen behind. The timing couldn't have been worse. Chicago was experiencing an early cold snap with temperatures dipping into the 30s at night. Are you all okay? Do you have heat? I asked, already reaching for my coat. We have the gas furnace, but no lights, no refrigeration. Your father is beside himself trying to reach someone at the utility company, but it's after hours now. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said, grabbing my car keys. When I arrived at my childhood home, the scene was surreal. Candles flickered in the windows, casting long shadows through the rooms. Dad sat at the kitchen table, illuminated by the glow of his cell phone, his face a mask of frustration. Mom was wrapping leftovers in aluminum foil, trying to preserve what she could from the refrigerator. James and Michael sat in the living room, looking unusually subdued. "Kelly, thank goodness," Mom greeted me with a relieved hug. Dad looked up, his expression a complicated mix of relief and wounded pride. "Kelly, your mother shouldn't have bothered you with this. We'll have it sorted by morning." "What happened exactly?" I asked, setting my purse down on the counter. Mom glanced at Dad, who had returned his attention to his phone. "After you left, we had to rearrange all the bill payments. Some were in your name, some in ours. There was confusion about the electricity. We thought it was being paid, but apparently we've missed the last two payments." "Three," Dad corrected grimly, not looking up. "They're saying we've missed 3 payments, and now we owe the full amount plus a reconnection fee before they'll restore service." "How much is that?" I asked. $847, he replied, the specific amount telling me he'd already been informed precisely what was owed. "But the soonest they can reconnect is tomorrow afternoon, even if we pay now." I did some quick mental math. The amount wasn't insurmountable, but it was significant, especially coming as an unexpected expense. "Do you have the money available?" I asked carefully. Dad's jaw tightened. "We've had some additional expenses lately. Your brothers have needed some help with their car payments." I glanced toward the living room where James and Michael were pretending not to listen. The situation was becoming clearer. Without my contribution, and with Dad apparently covering some of my brother's personal expenses, the household finances had slipped into disarray. "I can help," I offered, keeping my tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. "We don't need charity," Dad snapped, his pride clearly wounded. Mom placed a hand on his shoulder. "Frank, please, it's getting cold and we have a refrigerator full of food that's going to spoil." Just then, as if to punctuate her statement, the lights in the house flickered briefly as if teasing us, and then went completely dark again. Dad's phone screen illuminated his frustrated expression. "That was the furnace trying to kick on," he explained grimly. "The thermostat is electric, so the heat won't work either, even though the gas is still on." The temperature inside was already dropping noticeably. Outside, wind rattled the windows, underscoring the urgency of the situation. "Dad," I said firmly, "this isn't about pride right now. It's about practical solutions. I can make the payment online right now from my account, and you can pay me back when you're able." He looked up at me, and in the dim candlelight, I saw something shift in his expression. For perhaps the first time, he was seeing me not as his daughter who needed guidance, but as a capable adult offering genuine help. "The payment system is down for maintenance until morning," he said finally. "I already tried." "Then you should all come to my apartment for the night," I suggested. "It's small, but we'll make it work. It's too cold to stay here without heat." There was a long-waited silence. In it, I could feel my father wrestling with the symbolic implications of seeking shelter in the very apartment he had tried to dissuade me from renting. Mom broke the silence. "That's very generous, Kelly. We should accept." James and Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking uncertain. "Is this for real? We're spending the night at Kelly's," James asked. "Unless you'd prefer to freeze here," I replied. Michael was already heading upstairs. "I'll grab some overnight stuff." Dad remained seated, his posture rigid. "You three go." "I'll stay with the house." "Frank, don't be ridiculous," Mom said with uncharacteristic firmness. "It's going to drop into the 30s tonight. The pipes could freeze." "The pipes won't freeze in one night at these temperatures," he countered. I knelt beside his chair, meeting his eyes directly. "Dad, this isn't about being right or wrong anymore. This is about family taking care of each other. Isn't that what you've always taught us?" Those words, echoing his own long-held family values back to him, finally penetrated his pride. His shoulders slumped slightly. "I'll get some things," he conceded quietly. 20 minutes later, we were all piling into our vehicles, a small caravan heading to my studio apartment. As we pulled away from the darkened house, I caught my father looking back at it, his expression unreadable in the dim glow of the streetlights. The conversation we needed to have was coming, but tonight wasn't the time for recriminations or "I told you so" moments. Tonight was simply about keeping my family warm and safe, a role reversal none of us had anticipated. But that felt strangely right as we drove through the dark, cold Chicago night toward my small but well-lit apartment. My studio apartment wasn't designed to accommodate 5 adults. But that night, we made it work. I gave my parents the bed, set up an air mattress for my brothers, and took the couch for myself. The close quarters created an unexpected intimacy, reminding me of family camping trips from our childhood when we'd all pile into a single tent and whisper stories late into the night. Morning brought weak sunlight and the need for honest conversation. I made coffee while Mom prepared a simple breakfast from the groceries we'd salvaged from their refrigerator. The domestic routine felt familiar yet different, with all of us navigating my small kitchen, bumping elbows and murmuring apologies. After breakfast, Dad made the call to the utility company, his voice more humble than I'd ever heard it, as he arranged for payment and service restoration. When he hung up, he sat heavily at my small dining table, looking older than his 57 years. "They'll reconnect the service by 2 this afternoon," he announced. "I paid the full amount using our emergency fund." The mention of the emergency fund, a savings account my parents had maintained religiously throughout their marriage, was significant. Dad had always spoken of it as untouchable, except in dire circumstances. "I think we need to talk," I said gently, sitting across from him, "about what happened and how to prevent it from happening again." He nodded slowly, surprising me with his receptiveness. Mom joined us while James and Michael lingered uncertainly by the kitchen counter. "You two should sit down as well," I said to my brothers. "This concerns all of us." Once we were all seated around my small table, I took a deep breath and began. When I moved out, I wasn't just reacting to being asked to pay more. I was standing up for equal treatment and recognition of all my contributions to the household, financial and otherwise. Dad started to speak, but Mom placed a hand on his arm, silently asking him to listen. "What happened with the electricity isn't just about missed payments," I continued. "It's about a system that wasn't sustainable even before I left. Dad, you've been covering for James and Michael in ways you never did for me, and that created a false sense of financial security." James shifted uncomfortably but didn't deny it. Michael looked down at his hands. "I'm not saying this to make anyone feel bad," I clarified. "But we need to be honest about how we got here if we're going to fix it." Dad cleared his throat. "You're right." He admitted the words clearly difficult for him. "I've been thinking about it a lot these past months. I did ask more of you, Kelly, both financially and around the house. I told myself it was because you were more responsible, more capable, but that wasn't fair." His acknowledgement, something I'd never expected to hear, left me momentarily speechless. Mom picked up the thread. "We've all taken you for granted, Kelly, not just your father. I watched it happen and didn't intervene the way I should have. And we were basically useless around the house," Michael added, nudging James. "Yeah, whatever, I could have done more," James admitted grudgingly. I looked at my family gathered around my small table in my apartment and felt a shift in our dynamic. For perhaps the first time, we were speaking to each other as adults, acknowledging mistakes and taking responsibility. "So what now?" I asked. "How do we move forward from here?" Dad straightened in his chair, some of his natural authority returning, but tempered now with new humility. "First, we need a proper household budget that accounts for all expenses accurately. No more guesswork. And a fair division of labor," Mom added, "written down so there's no confusion about expectations." "I can help create a spreadsheet," I offered, "something that tracks both financial contributions and household tasks." We spent the next hour outlining a new system. Financial responsibilities would be divided equally among the 3 adult children, with adjustments only if someone's income changed significantly in either direction. Household chores would be assigned on a rotating basis, with clear expectations and accountability. "And what about living arrangements?" Mom asked, carefully looking at me. "Would you consider coming back home under these new terms?" I'd been expecting this question. "I appreciate the offer, Mom, but I think this apartment has become important to me. It represents independence I didn't know I needed until I had it." Dad nodded slowly, acceptance replacing disappointment in his eyes. "I understand that. And I respect it even if I miss having you home. But I'll come for dinner twice a week," I offered, "and I'm always available in emergencies like last night." "We'd like that," Mom said, squeezing my hand. By early afternoon, with the utility company confirming service restoration, my family prepared to return home. As they gathered their overnight things, there was a lightness between us that had been absent for months, perhaps years. Dad stopped by the door on his way out, hanging back after Mom and my brothers had already gone to the car. "Kelly," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. Not just for the money issue, but for not seeing you clearly, for valuing your contributions less because they seem to come more easily to you." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot to me." "You're a remarkable young woman," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Moving out, standing on your own, even helping us when we needed it, despite how things ended. I'm proud of you." The words I'd waited years to hear washed over me, healing old wounds I hadn't fully acknowledged. "I'm still learning too, Dad," I assured him. "We all are." He nodded, then surprised me with a firm hug before joining the others in the car. I watched from my window as they drove away back to a house that would have electricity and heat again, but more importantly, would hopefully have a new foundation of respect and fairness. As I turned back to my small apartment, I felt a profound sense of peace. My decision to leave had been painful, but necessary, not just for me, but for my entire family. Sometimes I realize the most loving thing you can do for the people you care about is to show them your boundaries, even when it hurts. In walking away, I had ultimately brought us closer together, on terms that honored all of us. 6 months after that pivotal night when the lights went out, my family gathered in my apartment to celebrate my 1-year anniversary of independent living. My small space was crowded but cozy, as Mom set out a homemade lasagna on my dining table, now expanded with a leaf I'd purchased specifically for family gatherings. "Remember when we all had to sleep here that night?" Michael laughed, looking around the apartment that now felt much more like a home decorated with framed artwork and personal touches. "How could I forget?" Dad replied good-naturedly. "My back still reminds me whenever it rains." The easy humor between us was one of many changes the past months had brought. Our new family dynamic had settled into something healthier and more balanced than I could have imagined during those tense days after my departure. True to our agreement, James and Michael had taken on equal shares of both financial responsibility and household duties at the family home. The chore chart we'd created that morning in my apartment still hung on the refrigerator, though they rarely needed to consult it anymore, as the routines had become habit. "Kelly helped me serve the salad," Mom asked, and I joined her in the small kitchen area. "Everything's different now, isn't it?" she said quietly as she tossed the greens. "In the best possible way." I nodded, watching Dad and my brothers setting the table without being asked a small but meaningful change. "It hasn't been easy, but we got there." The financial restructuring had been the simplest part. Each of us siblings now contributed exactly the same amount to the household expenses with quarterly reviews to ensure the arrangement remained fair as our careers progressed. Any adjustments would be transparent and applied equally. The deeper changes were in our family's understanding of contribution and value. Dad had begun to see housework and emotional labor as real contributions, not just women's work or obligations to be taken for granted. My brothers had developed new skills and independence, with Michael becoming a surprisingly good cook, and James taking pride in keeping the yard immaculate. I visited for dinner twice weekly, as promised, genuinely enjoying these family gatherings, now that they were built on mutual respect rather than obligation. My relationship with each family member had evolved into something more adult and balanced. Dad and I had developed a new tradition of Saturday morning coffee, either at my place or a cafe halfway between our homes, where we discussed everything from current events to financial planning. These conversations between equals rather than parent and child had healed wounds I hadn't realized ran so deep. "Dinner's ready," Mom announced, bringing us all to the table. As we settled into our seats, Dad raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, his voice carrying the warmth that had once been reserved for my brothers. "To Kelly, who had the courage to show us a better way to be a family. Your strength changed all of us for the better." "To Kelly," they echoed, raising their glasses. I felt my eyes grow damp as I looked around at their faces. "To family," I countered, "and to learning that love doesn't mean accepting unfairness, but having the courage to insist on better for everyone." As we enjoyed our meal together, I reflected on the journey of the past year. My decision to leave had never been about punishing my family or proving a point. It had been about valuing myself enough to insist on equal treatment. And in doing so, I had ultimately helped my entire family grow. The path hadn't been easy. There had been difficult conversations, moments of doubt, and adjustments for everyone. But sitting here now surrounded by family members who truly saw and valued each other, I knew that every difficult step had been worth it. True family, I had learned, isn't about unquestioning acceptance of unfair treatment or sacrificing yourself to keep peace. It's about loving each other enough to insist on mutual respect, to establish healthy boundaries, and sometimes to walk away temporarily so that you can all come back together on better terms. As dinner concluded and conversation flowed easily around my small living room, I caught Dad's eye across the space. He gave me a slight nod, a private acknowledgement of how far we'd come. In that moment, I felt a profound gratitude for the difficult decision I'd made a year ago, and for the stronger, healthier family it had ultimately created. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that ended up changing your family dynamic for the better? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about setting boundaries and finding your worth. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to stand firm in your value. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to create the relationships you deserve.